Good afternoon, distinguished city gentlemen. Let us close the market. Closing prayer, please.
Live feeds there from the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Closing gong bringing to an end trading for the day. It's on that note that we welcome you to the show. Money is a defense. Naturally, it's the live wire of any business venture, irrespective of whatever business line you want to venture into. As an entrepreneur, without adequate financing, your business may just be a one-hit wonder after all. SMEs in Nigeria have over the years struggled with getting funds to start and maintain their businesses. While issues bordering on collateral from banks and other financial institutions remain a major obstacle, but not everyone is aware about the availability of intervention funds from government and other financial institutions and how to access them for businesses. Well, someone who's an authority in that sector is my guest today on the show. Just stay with us. We'll be right back. Well, news just in now says the Senate has passed the 2019 appropriation bill of 8.816 trillion naira into law. This follows the submission of the report of the Committee on Appropriation headed by Senator Danjuma Goje. The Senate then did a clause-on-clause consideration of the bill, and thereafter it passed the third reading. The 2019 appropriation bill is higher than the initial budget proposal of 8.83 trillion naira presented to the National Assembly by President Muhammadu Buhari in December last year. The budget was increased by 86 billion naira. Shell Petroleum Development Company and French oil major Total have declared force majeure on the export of Nigeria's Bonny Light and Amenam grades of crude oil. Bonny Light and Amenam grades of crude are light and sweet, typically suitable for petrol production. Shell blamed the action on the closure of the Nembe Creek truck line, one of the two major export pipelines used by Shell and other producing companies in the eastern Niger Delta to evacuate crude oil to export terminals. The Trans-Niger pipeline is the second major pipeline used by the upstream companies in the eastern Niger Delta. The development has disrupted exports of more than 200,000 barrels of crude per day. The Managing Director, Transmission Company of Nigeria, Usman Guru Mohammed, says 11 power distribution companies require about $4.3 trillion capitalization fund to match the investment being done in the transmission section. Mr. Mohammed adds that government has supported the power sector with 213 billion naira CBN Power Sector Intervention Fund, 701 billion naira, and now the FG is set to approve another 600 billion naira payment assurance fund. TCN has attracted about $1.32 billion multilateral funding and is executing projects targeted at attaining 20,000 megawatts energy wheeling capacity by the year 2021. Nigeria's over 37.07 million micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises, MSMEs, account for more than 84% of jobs in the country. The enterprises also account for about 48.5% of the gross domestic product GDP, as well as 7.27% of goods and services exported out of the country. The Central Bank of Nigeria over the years demonstrated capacity to increase lending, provide access to affordable credit facility, and diversify the country's economic base, create jobs, and improve macroeconomic stability. Well, to look critically at issues surrounding MSMEs and also, of course, around the economy, I have the former acting managing director of the Bank of Industry with me in the studio, Dr. Wahid Olagunju. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start with some of these figures I just reeled out, GDP, contribution of the SMEs to the GDP and all of that. How well would you say SMEs are fared in this country with your assessment?
Well, relative to our potentials, we've not done as much as we should have. When you compare what has happened in Nigeria since independence to what has happened in similar countries, countries who were the same starting line perhaps in 1960, or Nigeria was even better off in 1960. I'll throw up statistics. As of 1970, which was 10 years after Nigeria's independence, about 49 years ago, we'll be doing 50 years by next year from 1970, would you believe it that Nigeria's GDP per capita was double that of China at $233, and Nigeria ranked 88th in the world in terms of GDP per capita. China in 1970 had a GDP per capita of $111 and ranked about 114 in the world. Mexico is an oil-producing country like Nigeria with population of 120 million. As of 1970, Mexico depended on export of crude oil for about 80% of its revenue. Yes. And at that time, Nigeria too depended on petroleum at that time, 70 to 80%. 49 years down the line, we are still at the same level, depending on exportation of crude oil for 80 to 90% of our revenue. Mexico has been able to reverse. In almost 40 years, Mexico now, the manufacturing sector in Mexico now generates about 80% of the country's income, and export of crude oil accounts for only 20%. So what that means is that these are countries in the southern hemisphere. They've done things correctly, but unfortunately in Nigeria, we have not done things correctly. That's why we are still where we are, and the rest of the world has left us behind. Not only the rest of the world, even some African countries are doing better than Nigeria. As recent as Rwanda, they are doing remarkably well. Ethiopia, exactly. Right? Cote d'Ivoire, after the war. Cote d'Ivoire now exports electricity. Right, so in a number of African countries, not even talk of those in the North Africa or even Southern Africa. Let's look at sub-Saharan Africa. Right, so we need to really get our act together. And it's not too late. It's not too late. Given the Nigeria that I know, and with all due respect, I mean, I've operated in this system for about 40 years. If we get our act together, in 10 years, we can surprise the world. If only we get our act together. We have the can-do spirit. We have the natural resource endowments. And with all humility, in my first career as a journalist and as a development banker later on, I've traveled to about 35 countries. I have not seen any country that is better blessed than Nigeria. Others have done much, much better in spite of their challenges and handicaps. But we are underperforming relative to what we have. Starting from our location, which we take for granted, being a coastal country is a big advantage. A lot of landlocked countries have challenges. Rwanda is landlocked, but then they are doing quite well, right? But the access to the Atlantic Ocean is an advantage we have. We have tremendous agricultural resources, soil and mineral resources. The Raw Material Research and Development Council commissioned a study. The team was headed by Professor Bamiro, former Vice Chancellor of University of Ibadan. And they were able to identify all the natural resource endowments in each of the 774 local governments. FIDO also followed suit with a similar study. And they also came up with the technology required to be able to harness those natural resource endowments. So in other words, every local government in this country can support viable commercial enterprise, economic activity. So what we need is the political will to do the right thing. And then, of course, the willingness of fellow Nigerians to also do the right thing. Because we can't leave everything to government. It's true that the governments are the prime movers of development all over the world, followed by the private sector, the international development community, right, our development partners, as well as community-based organizations. But we, the people, have to also be committed and determined to ensure that our leaders Whenever they say, this is the division, let's move in that direction, the followers to follow.
Now, this brings me to talking about, yes, Nigerians, resilient people, we are dogged, we are ready to do this, but we have challenges in this part of the world, specific ones, power, capital. Yes, I know you've read all of this, but they're real. How do youths like us, how can we key into it? Agriculture is not looking very, it's not mechanized for youths to really come in. How do we get it
They
right?
are self-inflicted, that we are not able to generate up to 30 to 40,000 megawatts that some say we need at the barest minimum to optimally run the Nigerian economy is our own. I mean, we have to blame ourselves for it. Nobody to blame, right? We know the right thing to do. We know how to come up with the right energy mix. It's not by accident that the African Development Bank came up with the high fives. And one of them, the most important one, is Light Up Africa.
Yes.
We need electricity. We've been talking about it. It's just for us to ensure that we do the right thing. We have tremendous sun energy from the sun to generate solar. We have hydro resources to generate hydroelectricity. We have gas to do thermal. In some parts of the country, although it's the least capacity we have in terms of wind, but in terms of energy mix, we have what it takes to generate the energy required in this country. But it's just for us to do the right thing. We've not done the right thing over the years. And that was why when Hillary Clinton visited Nigeria when she was Secretary of State, she said Nigeria is where it is today due to leadership failure over the years. She didn't blame any particular government. What that means is that in the last 50 years, we've not done well. We've not done as much as we should have. But then we have a golden opportunity now. We've had 20 years of democracy. And in these 20 years, a lot of advances have been made, we must say. For example, banking. The revolution is unprecedented. The Nigerian banking sector today, in my own opinion, is doing better than some banks in other parts of the world. In the telecom sector, the revolution that took place in this country is also unprecedented, but is underreported. Nobody is singing our praises in that area. Moving from less than 500,000 telephone lines or access subscribers in 2001 to more than 100 million within a short period of time. There is nowhere else in the world where this has been recorded. They couldn't have done so because they even had limitations in terms of population. It's only in a huge country like Nigeria that such is possible. And there are about 12 countries in the world with populations above 100 million. MTN is a South African company. They couldn't do in South Africa what they were able to do in Nigeria because there are limitations in terms of markets. It's a small country, South Africa, but they're able to do more in Nigeria because of the population. So we're naturally endowed. In the next 2 years or so, we shall become, God willing, self-dependent, self-reliant in terms of petroleum resources. By the time the Dangote Industries complete their refineries in Lagos. In fact, that would be the biggest game changer in the history of Nigeria's economy, in the history of Nigeria's development. Once that happens, all the subsidy on petroleum will stop. We've been talking about subsidy for the past 30, 40 years. What that also means is that of structure, we've not been able to change the structure of the Nigerian economy. Because in my first world as a journalist, I was head of the economic desk in the 80s. And we're covering the debate on whether subsidies should be done or not. And this has been on. And I mean, 30 years down the line, we're still talking about the same thing.
We're still doing
which
that
means
now.
Structurally speaking, we've not been able to change the Nigerian. We've paid lip service to efforts at diversifying the Nigerian economy. But now, let us take the bull by the horn. Let us be serious. Because the SDGs have been set by 2030. The objective is to eradicate poverty in the world. That's 11 years from now. If we get our act together today, in 11 years' time, we can make a lot of progress. Even by pursuing the things to do are already there. There's no reinventing the wheel. If you are able to adopt the 5 high fives of the African Development Bank, Light Up Africa, Feed Africa, Industrialize Africa, Integrate Africa, and improve the living standards of Africans, if we applied them in Nigeria, we would have achieved, by some studies, by development experts, 90% of the Sustainable Development Goals. and 90% of the Agenda 2063 of the African Union. So in terms of prescription, what we need to do is already out there. It's just for us to do the right. At the national level, a lot has been done, I must say. The Economic Recovery and Growth Plan is there. It's just for the states to also implement, because we're in a federation. In that of ease of doing business, yesterday, the Minister of Industry and Investment, Mr. Dr. Suleiman, and Jumoke Oduwole, the lady who's in charge, have done remarkably well, recording about 63% success rate. It's for the states now to now buy into those things. Kaduna State, for instance, bought into it. That was why, according to the World Bank's ranking, Kaduna State ranked #1, and the state government was given an award for that. I was also impressed when I saw the president in Maiduguri commissioning the industrial park, because that's a big breakthrough. We need to have as many industrial parks in Nigeria, because that's a short-term measure, medium-term measure at industrializing this country, given the challenges and the vagaries in the environment.
There's this question I would like to ask you. We hear of interventions from, yes, you were formerly with the Bank of Industry. Most recently is Development Bank of Nigeria. Even the Central Bank of Nigeria, lots of funds are always made available. But do people really access these funds, or what's the challenge in accessing these funds?
That's because we've also adopted the supply-side solution in this country. Let's throw money at the problem without thinking of the absorptive capacity of the MSMEs to make proper use of those funds. Because those funds are not supposed to be grants, right? In most cases, we are talking of credit. Now, what is the capacity of those people? I've always maintained that Nigeria has never had shortage of funds for SMEs. Yes. I'll give an example. In the 80s, during the Structural Adjustment Program, the World Bank gave us a facility of about $270 million or so. It was called SME Apex. We were paying commitment fees. Nigerians could not come up with potentially bankable proposals to draw down. We had to return the money to the World Bank. Yes. In 2015, at the Bank of Industry, we adopted a 5-year strategic plan, under which we have marked 320 billion naira for disbursement to SMEs in Nigeria. Up until 2018, we have not been able to disburse up to 50% of that, because not many entrepreneurs have been able to come up with potentially bankable. So what I'm talking about is that capacity. So we need to build the capacity of our people. A huge population can be an asset, can be a liability. Yeah. If they are productive, then they are an asset. If they are productive, a liability, because we need to ensure that the GDP growth rate is much higher than that of the population. And the wider the positive gap, the better. And we need to ensure, given our average population growth at about 3%, we need to ensure that our GDP grows at double digit, consistently for a period of 20-25 years, for us to do what the Chinese did. And we can double our GDP if we get our act together, if we are able to solve power problem. For instance, before the recession, the Nigerian economy was among the 10 fastest growing in the world, with an average of 5 to 7%. And that was without power. When I say without power, I mean we're generating maybe about 5,000 megawatts. But you can imagine if we're able to generate and deliver, and Nigerians are able to access up to 20,000 megawatts, our GDP will double easily. When our GDP doubles, the per capita income will also go up, provided we're able to keep our population below 3% growth. And then the per capita income, what happened in Mexico can easily happen in Nigeria too. Because Mexico, as the middle of this decade, became the 14th largest economy in the world. And the per capita income was about 1.8 trillion, right? And with Nigeria at what, you know? So it's the GDP in Mexico is doing much more bigger. So they are done quite well for themselves, and their population of about 120 million. So we can do that in this country. And I know that Nigerians, like you said, very resilient, very determined, very committed people. All we do is just get our act together. And the state governments have a lot of work to do in this regard, because most of the SMEs operate in the states. They don't operate at the national level. That's why I said the federal government has done quite a lot with the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan. We have the NEDEP, National Economic, they're all components of the ARGP, as well as the Nigerian Industrial Revolution Plan.
Some say that document is too ambitious, the RGP.
What do you mean by being ambitious? What do you mean by
looking
being
at
ambitious?
the growth rate, the percentage fixed for maybe growth rate and job creation. Some are saying
my
that
approach to development is that we need to say where we want to get to. We say the per capita income today is below $2,000. Right? If we want a per capita income to get to $10,000, $15,000, life more abundant for our people, so that our young boys will not be going to Libya to try and cross to Europe, we need to tell ourselves, what do we need to do to get there? So we need to get our act together. So I don't believe those figures are too ambitious. Because if you aim for the sky, you end up on the trees. But if you aim for the moon, you'll go far. That's my approach. Because, I mean, look at the Bank of Industry, for instance. I was part of the team that turned that institution around from a marginal national DFI in 2001 to a globally rated, AA rated national DFI, one of the best in Africa. AA rated by Fitch, AA rated by Moody's and Augustus. So we knew how we did it. Nigerians, homegrown solution. We were able to resolve the challenges. We were able to move that institution from where it was to where it is today. So I know it is doable. When those targets were being set in Bank of Industry, some people too felt they were not achievable. But then we had brilliant managing directors who provided good leadership, and the management team and the staff bought into the vision, and everybody started working 24/7. And in no time we got there. So that even during the recession in 2016, that was when we posted the best performance ever recorded in the history of the bank at that time, despite the recession. Because we were all determined and we knew what to do. We had challenges, we were able to overcome those challenges. So those challenges in Nigeria are also surmountable. They are not insurmountable.
I support, I told that. Like Dr. Haidolaguju, thank you so much. I know you can go on. Former acting managing director of Bank of Industry, giving insights to issues surrounding SMEs and even Nigerian economy in its entirety. Thank you very much for spending your afternoon with us on Business Nigeria.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you very much. Well, before we go, let's tell you that leaders of Canada and Japan have pitched the benefits of Pacific trade deal that United States President Donald Trump walked away from and said the pact should serve a model for future agreements. Details in this report.
The landmark 11-country trade deal, a revamped version of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, came into force last December. It does not include the United States, which pulled out of talks on the initial TPP in 2017.
Because of Prime Minister Abe's leadership, we were able to move forward on a deal that is both comprehensive and progressive, that has benefited tremendously in Canadian citizens, Japanese citizens and businesses, and indeed people throughout the region.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said exports of some beef products from Canada to Japan had increased nearly threefold under the deal, formerly known as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Prime Minister Abe, who met with Trump at the White House a day earlier, said he shared the same position with Canada. Trump, whose administration is working on a bilateral free trade deal with Japan, said after a meeting with Abe that an agreement could be reached next month.
Going forward, the United States multilateral trade regime includes WTO, U.S. countries to play an important role. I think recently there will be the upcoming G20 meeting and the forum of G20 going forward. Promotion of free trade or through innovation to lead global economic growth, deal with disparity, inequalities in many areas of U.S., of course, plays an important role. Therefore, in that regard, Canada and Japan, I think we share the same position, but we should cooperate together so the United States will be encouraged to be the leader of the liberal free world, and we would like to cooperate with Canada.
Both men, however, made clear they differed in some areas, with Trump citing Japanese tariffs on American agricultural products and Abe bringing up U.S. tariffs on Japanese autos.
Well, before we go, let's tell you that the market is down 1.22%. That's figures reaching us live from the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. So on that note, that will round up the show. Thank you very much for watching. Let's do this again tomorrow, same time. Enjoy the rest of your day.